Hello, Jennifer here. I have been excited to share this one with you. It's about respect, accountability, and a firm no. And yes, the payoff is worth it. Let's listen.
My parents disowned me for refusing to give up my 8-year-old daughter. "She is such a burden," my mom said. "Things would be better without her here," my sister added. I got up and walked out the door. The next time they saw us, they couldn't hide their shock. I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table with both hands around a mug of coffee I had forgotten to drink, trying to say the words out loud without throwing something. My ex-husband Brian had just told me he planned to take our daughter Cora, who was 8, out of state with the woman he cheated on me with, and I had come there still shaking from the conversation because I thought outrage would be automatic. "He thinks he can just take her from me," I said. "Like she's a duffel bag he can load into his car." My mother stood by the sink drying the same plate twice. My father sat at the head of the table with the local news murmuring from the den. My sister Erica was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching me the way people watch a mess they don't want on their floor. Cora was in the next room with a sketch pad and her headphones, drawing robots with tiny square hands. I remember that detail because everything that came after split the night cleanly in two. I walked into that kitchen expecting backup, not a verdict. Then my mother set the plate down. My mother didn't come sit beside me. She didn't ask what Brian had said exactly, or whether Cora had heard any of it, or whether I had eaten. She pulled out a chair across from me, folded the dish towel into a neat square, and said, "Elena, calm down." I stared at her because that was the tone she used when I overcooked pasta as a teenager. Not when a man who skipped therapy appointments and grocery store meltdowns suddenly wanted full custody. "I am calm," I said, even though my voice came out hard. "I'm telling you, he thinks he can take my child." My mother's face barely moved. "If her father wants her," she said, "let him have her." The room did not explode. That was the worst part. My father looked down at the table, rubbed one thumb along the rim of his glass, and said nothing at all. Erica's eyebrows lifted for half a second, but she didn't challenge it either. The refrigerator hummed. A cabinet door clicked shut. I kept waiting for one person to laugh and say my mother had lost her mind. No one did. My father's silence sat there like a second voice. That was the first crack. I pushed my chair back so fast it scraped the tile and made my mother flinch, which was the first sign she understood I had heard her correctly. "No," I said. "Absolutely not." My voice was low now, and that made all three of them look at me. "She is my daughter. I'm not handing her over because Brian suddenly wants to play father with an audience." My mother inhaled through her nose the way she did when she thought I was being dramatic on purpose. My father reached for the remote and muted the television, finally deciding this was worth full attention. Erica uncrossed her arms and came to the table, not to stand behind me, but to sit next to my mother like they were already on the same side. "You need to think practically," my mother said. "Practically," I repeated. "About my child?" She gave a small shrug that felt uglier than a shout. "About your whole life." I could hear the dull scratch of Cora's marker in the other room. She was still close. She was still inside earshot. I should have lowered my voice then, but I was still trying to understand how I had ended up defending my daughter against my own family. I was already arguing with the wrong people. Erica leaned forward first, elbows on the table, like she had been waiting all night for permission to say something ugly and call it honesty. "She takes too much," she said. "Your time, your money, your energy. Everything in your life is about managing one crisis after another." I turned to her so sharply my neck hurt. "She is 8, I said. "She needs support, not a performance review." Erica rolled one shoulder. "I'm not being cruel. I'm being real." My mother nodded like that settled it. "You've put your whole life on hold," she said. "For years." Then my father, who had barely opened his mouth, gave one quiet nod in agreement. That nod hit harder than Erica's words. If he had snapped at me, I could have fought him. If he had stood up and said something blunt, I could have answered it. But that small, tidy motion told me this had already been discussed somewhere without me. "Brian has a job," Erica said. "Maybe he can give her more stability." I laughed once, short and sharp. Brian disappears when the checkout scanner beeps too loud. No one argued with that. They just looked annoyed that I had made their point less convenient. That was when I understood they meant every word. The fight turned cruel so quickly it almost felt rehearsed. My mother looked past me toward the doorway and said, in the same tone she used to complain about broken appliances, "She is such a burden." For one second, I honestly thought I had misheard her because there was no safe way to understand a grandmother saying that about a child. Then Erica added, "Things would be better without her in your life." She didn't whisper it. She didn't soften it. She said it flat, like she was discussing a cluttered room. I stood up. My chair tipped over behind me and hit the floor. "Do not talk about my daughter like that." My mother rose too, not angry, not ashamed, just cold. "Then hear me clearly," she said. "If you decide to keep her, then don't call me your mother." My father stayed seated. He looked at the fallen chair, then at the table, then at his own hands. He still didn't speak. A child's drawing pencil rolled somewhere in the next room and stopped. The whole kitchen changed shape in that second. It was no longer a place where I had grown up. It was a room full of people trying to make me choose convenience over my child. And then the hallway went quiet. I knew before I turned around that Cora had heard enough. She was standing just outside the kitchen entrance with her headphones hanging around her neck, one hand gripping her sketch pad hard enough to bend it. Her face wasn't loud. That would have been easier. She looked stunned, like the floor had opened under her and she was still waiting to land. "Cora," I said, and the minute I moved toward her, she backed away. Then she turned and ran down the hallway to the guest room where we had been staying. I followed her and found her on the floor between the bed and the wall with her knees pulled to her chest, trying so hard not to make noise that it hurt to look at her. "Hey," I said softly, dropping beside her. "Baby, look at me." She kept staring at the carpet. After a long second, she whispered, "Grandma doesn't want me here." I put my hand over hers and felt her shaking. "Listen to me," I said. "You did nothing wrong. Not one thing." She swallowed hard. "Am I making everything bad?" "No," I said. "You are not the problem in this house." She leaned into me then, tight and trembling. That was the moment I stopped arguing. I didn't go back to the kitchen to negotiate, and I didn't wait for anyone to knock on the guest room door and fix what they had said. I pulled out 2 overnight bags and packed fast. Cora's soft pajamas, her headphones, tablet charger, stuffed fox, gray blanket, and every sensory tool I could find in the drawer by the bed. Cora sat on the mattress while I moved around the room with the kind of focus that shows up after panic burns off. My mother did come to the doorway once. "Elena, don't be dramatic," she said. I zipped a bag and kept moving. Erica passed behind her and muttered, "This is exactly what we mean." My father stood farther back in the hall with one hand on the wall, looking like a man observing weather. "You had control," I told him without raising my voice. "You used it by saying nothing." Then I took Cora's hand, picked up the bags, and walked her through the house I had grown up in without stopping for photos or goodbyes. The porch light clicked on above us as I opened the door. Cora looked up at me and asked, "Are we coming back?" I tightened my grip on her hand and led her to the car. That was the moment I chose her out loud. Cora turned 3 on a hot Saturday in my parents' backyard, and I had spent the whole morning trying to make the party gentle enough for her to enjoy. I cut the guest list down, bought quiet toys, and told everyone not to crowd her, but relatives still came through the gate carrying noise with them. Balloons popped against chair backs. Someone dragged out a Bluetooth speaker. My aunt bent down with frosting on her finger just as 2 cousins started shrieking over bubbles. Cora dropped to the grass like her strings had been cut. She screamed, clapped both hands over her ears, and kicked when my uncle tried to lift her. "Don't touch her," I said, already on my knees beside her. "Give her space." My mother stood by the patio table holding paper plates and looking embarrassed, not concerned. Erica whispered, "What is wrong with her?" Brian, my husband then, took one look at the scene and stepped through the side gate like he needed fresh air more than his child needed help. I stayed in the grass with Cora until her breathing slowed. A few weeks later, after appointments and forms and a specialist who watched carefully before speaking, I heard the word autism for the first time. The diagnosis came later. The distance started at that party, and over the next few years, nobody in my family got warmer about it. A month after the diagnosis, I had a grocery store afternoon that felt like a warning shot for the rest of my marriage. Cora was in the cart, tired already, and I was trying to get through milk, cereal, and detergent before the rush hit. Then the overhead lights started flickering in one aisle. A baby began crying 2 carts over, and the checkout scanner kept firing the same sharp beep. Cora pressed both hands to her ears. "Too loud," she said, then louder. "Too loud! Too loud!" I abandoned half the cart, scooped her up while she kicked against my hip, and carried her outside with strangers watching me like I had failed a public test. By the time we got home, we were drenched in sweat. I got her inside, into the dim bedroom with her weighted blanket, then stood at the kitchen counter trying to steady my hands. Brian came in, saw the groceries still in bags by the door, and said, "What happened now?" I told him. He didn't ask whether she was okay. He didn't ask whether I needed a minute. He grabbed his keys and said, "I can't do this every day." "You don't," I said. He pretended not to hear me. "I've got to work late." The front door shut before I could answer. That sentence became a habit. I kept taking Cora to my parents' house for a while because I still wanted to believe familiarity could help, even if warmth didn't. One quiet afternoon, she sat on the den rug lining up toy cars by color, perfectly content, blue to green to yellow, then back again because she liked the sequence better that way. Erica came in carrying an iced coffee, watched for 10 seconds, and rolled her eyes. "She doesn't even play normally," she said. "She is playing," I answered. "She just isn't doing it for your entertainment." My mother laughed under her breath like I was making a scene out of nothing. Later, while Cora stayed on the floor happily absorbed in her rose, my parents started talking across the kitchen island about Erica's future like it was a holiday brochure. "When you have kids," my mother said, "we're going to spoil that grandbaby rotten." My father smiled and said he couldn't wait to teach a little one how to fish. I stood there with Cora's juice box in my hand and listened to them talk about some imaginary child with more tenderness than they had ever shown the granddaughter already in the room. Cora didn't look up. I did. That was when the omission became impossible to ignore. By the time I found the messages on Brian's phone, the affair didn't shock me as much as his energy did. He had been flat with me for months, but suddenly he was smiling at a screen, typing with both thumbs, carrying his phone face down when he walked out of the room. One night he left it on the bathroom counter while he showered, and I saw a message banner from a woman named Sydney that started with, "I miss last night already." I opened the thread and stopped reading only when the words began to blur. It wasn't flirting. It was a relationship with its own routines, jokes, plans. When he came out, towel around his waist, I held the phone up and asked, "How long?" He took the phone, glanced once, and sighed like I had found parking tickets. "Does it matter?" he said. "Yes," I said. "It matters to me." He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his face. "This hasn't been working for a long time." Not sorry, not ashamed, just inconvenienced. Within days, the separation was real, and because I needed somewhere stable while I figured out money and school and therapy schedules, I took Cora and moved into my parents' guest room. I thought a roof was the same thing as support. The custody threat came so casually, it took me a second to understand what Brian was actually saying. We were sitting across from each other at a chain restaurant because neither of us wanted the conversation in a house, and Cora was at an after-school program 2 blocks away. Brian stirred iced tea he wasn't drinking and said Sydney had an opportunity in another state, that he might go too, and that it made sense for Cora to come with them for a fresh start. I laughed once. "No," I said. "You don't get to disappear during every hard week and then relocate her like a job transfer." His face changed immediately. "I'm her father," he said. "You don't own her." "And you don't know her," I said. "You skipped appointments. You left stores. You vanished when things got hard." He leaned back and folded his arms. "If you want to fight," he said, "you can have one." There it was. Not concern, not love, not a sudden desire to parent better. Just a contest. I picked Cora up from the program with that sentence still ringing in my ears and drove straight to my parents' house because I needed someone to say I wasn't crazy for hearing danger in it. That was how I ended up at their kitchen table expecting backup. The hotel room smelled like industrial cleaner and old air conditioning, and Cora knew it wasn't home the second we opened the door. She stopped in the entryway with her backpack still on and looked at the carpet, the 2 stiff beds, the yellow light, the humming wall unit, and the hallway glow under the door. "No," she said quietly. "No, no, no." I set the bags down and went straight into motion because there wasn't room for me to fall apart too. I turned the air conditioner off, rolled towels against the gap under the door, and put her gray blanket on one bed. I lined up her headphones, stuffed fox, toothbrush, and tablet on the nightstand and asked, "Can you help me make the safe corner?" She was breathing too fast to answer, but she nodded. We dragged the desk chair into the corner, tucked her blanket over it like a little roof, and sat beneath it with the lamp off. "When are we going home?" she asked for the first time. Then again, and again. I told her the truth I could manage. "We're going somewhere new, and I'm with you." She leaned against my shoulder sometime after midnight and finally unclenched. Broken or not, I was still home. Within 4 days, I found a small rental apartment in a tired brick building with a narrow staircase and a landlord who cared more about rent than anyone's story. The place had a tiny kitchen, a living room just big enough for a second-hand couch, and a little bedroom at the end of the hall that I turned into Cora's space before I unpacked most of my own things. I used soft bulbs instead of the overhead light, labeled clear bins for socks and art supplies and sensory toys, taped a picture schedule beside her door, and put her favorite blankets in exact layers because order calmed her faster than speeches. When she walked in after school and saw everything arranged, she touched the labels with 2 fingers and said, "You made it make sense." That night my mother texted, not to ask where we were or whether Cora had settled, but to say, "Let me know when you're getting the rest of your things. We are not a storage unit." I read it twice, set the phone face down, and went back to screwing together a wobbly thrift store bookshelf. Brian sent 2 hard emails about custody that same week. then missed a scheduled call with Cora's therapist and went quiet. My mother's message sat unanswered. Some silences explain themselves. Christmas came with no invitation, no phone call, and no last-minute excuse dressed up as logistics. By then, Cora was old enough to notice absence without me naming it for her. A week before the holiday, she stood at our apartment window watching the mail truck and asked, "Are we going to Grandma's house this year?" I didn't lie. "No," I said. She looked down, thought for a second, and asked, "Can we stay home?" So we made a plan. I bought matching pajamas from a clearance rack, cut frozen pizza into star shapes with kitchen scissors, and put a tiny artificial tree on the windowsill because floor space was tight. Cora spent an hour arranging the lights by color before she let me plug them in. On Christmas morning, I gave her one present that mattered: a beginner robotics kit with little snap circuits and a booklet full of projects. She opened the box, sat cross-legged on the rug, and disappeared into it for the rest of the day except to ask for batteries and a grilled cheese sandwich. I watched her concentration settle over the room. Outside our apartment, my family told people I had pulled away. Inside it, I was building a holiday no one could cancel. We were making our own traditions from scratch. By the time Cora was 14, the apartment looked different, but the rhythm inside it was the same. Clear surfaces, labeled drawers, routines taped where they needed to be, and room for her mind to work. One evening, she came home from school carrying a half-built engineering model from a district showcase project Mr. Alvarez's seniors were preparing to display. She set the board on our kitchen table, frowned once, and said, "Their wiring diagram is wrong." I looked over and saw colored wires and plastic housing that meant nothing to me. "Wrong how?" I asked. She pointed to one section. "If the sensor triggers here, the whole thing stalls. They designed it to fail." She emailed her teacher, Mr. Alvarez, who replied 3 minutes later, "Can you show me tomorrow?" Instead of waiting, Cora pulled out graph paper, redrew the entire sequence, and stayed up half the night rebuilding the model piece by piece while I handed her tape, tea, and silence. Next afternoon, Mr. Alvarez called me from the school workshop. "Your daughter just fixed a problem my seniors on the showcase team missed," he said. "She doesn't think like everyone else, and that's her strength." Cora came home carrying the repaired project and a shy, stunned expression I wanted to frame. They had spent years measuring what she found difficult. I was watching what she could build. The scholarship email came one evening when the sink was full of dishes and I was chopping onions for soup. Cora, 18 by then and taller than me, was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and 3 college portals bookmarked in a row because she liked checking things in the same order. Then she went still. Not excited. Still. Blank still. She stood up, turned the laptop toward me, and said, "Read this." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and leaned over the screen. It was an acceptance letter to an elite engineering and innovation program, full scholarship, housing included, research grant attached. I read the first paragraph twice because my eyes kept filling. "Cora," I said. She grabbed the edge of the table. "Is it real?" "It's real." She sat down hard in the chair and covered her mouth with both hands. I kept reading the details out loud because hearing a thing in a room makes it settle into the walls. When I got to the line about her exceptional design thinking and commitment to accessible technology, I laughed and cried at the same time. Cora looked at me over her fingers and said, very quietly, "They want me there." "Of course they do," I said. In that kitchen, after everything, someone had finally answered her exactly right. The company started as a university project, then refused to stay that small. Cora designed a sensory-friendly assistive device that helped neurodivergent kids manage overstimulation without drawing attention to themselves, and one of her professors pulled her aside after a presentation and said, "Do not let somebody else commercialize this before you understand what you built." She spent 2 years refining it, testing it, listening to families, and learning how to sit in rooms full of investors who kept mistaking quiet for uncertainty until she opened a prototype case and made them pay attention. Then one afternoon, back in that same apartment kitchen where we had opened the scholarship email, her phone rang from an unknown number. She answered, listened, and stopped moving entirely. I was wiping down the counter and knew better than to interrupt. When she finally lowered the phone, she looked almost annoyed by how stunned she was. "They're in," she said. "National rollout. Final paperwork next week." "Who is in?" I asked. She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "The partner. The big one." I sat down because my knees had gone unreliable. She stayed standing in the middle of our little kitchen, phone still in one hand, as years of work turned into something the rest of the country would see. A month later, an embossed invitation arrived in our mailbox, an industry gala where Cora would be honored for the device that had just been picked up for national rollout. The ballroom was all glass, gold light, and polished floors that made every heel sound deliberate. Staff members were testing microphones on the stage while servers moved between round tables setting water glasses at exact angles, and I stood near the back wall pretending to be interested in a floral arrangement, because if I looked straight at the stage too long, I started seeing the hotel room, the thrift store bookshelf, the years when success was just one more private thing Cora and I had to build without applause. Cora, now grown and steady in a dark blue dress she had chosen because the fabric didn't itch, was talking with one of the event organizers near the front. Then the room shifted for me. My parents had just walked in. I never found out who gave them the event details, but whatever guest screening the gala had, it wasn't strict enough to keep them out. Erica was with them, dressed in cream satin and confidence, scanning the tables until she spotted Cora. My mother's face arranged itself instantly into the kind of emotional smile people practice in mirrors. My father, who once sat through the worst words of my life without opening his mouth, was suddenly standing tall beside her like a man prepared to receive congratulations. None of them looked hesitant. None of them looked like people entering a room they had no right to be in. They looked eager. They had come dressed for ownership. I started toward them, but they moved faster. My mother reached Cora first and touched her arm like she had earned the right. "Look at you," she said softly. "We always knew you were meant for great things." Erica stepped in beside her with a bright smile already turned outward for the benefit of nearby guests. "Families should be together for moments like this," she said. My father hovered just behind them, nodding at people who glanced over, as if he expected to be included in introductions. Cora stood very still, which to anyone who didn't know her looked composed. I knew better. It meant she was taking inventory. My mother went on without waiting. "We're just so proud," she said, louder now. "She's overcome so much." Erica laughed lightly and added, "Our girl has always been brilliant." I felt cold all over. Not because they were lying in public, but because they were doing it with confidence, with the easy entitlement of people who believed success erased history. A reporter with a badge around her neck turned slightly toward them. An event volunteer smiled, assuming this was a reunion worth witnessing. My mother leaned in as if she might kiss Cora's cheek. I stepped between them before she could. They weren't here to apologize. They were here to attach themselves. "Leave," I said. I didn't raise my voice, and that seemed to irritate my mother more than if I had made a scene. "Elena," she said, dropping into a confidential tone. Enough time has passed. Not for this, I answered. Erica folded her arms and gave me the same look she used to wear in my parents' kitchen whenever compassion seemed inconvenient. You are still doing this? She asked. Tonight of all nights? I looked at her. Especially tonight. My mother tried again. We're family, whether you like it or not. Family doesn't tell an 8-year-old she'd be better off gone, I said. Her mouth tightened. Erica stepped closer and lowered her voice just enough to sound strategic. No one is asking to relive old drama. Cora is doing well now. You both are. There's room to repair things, support each other, be connected the right way. There it was under the makeup and soft language. Access. To Cora. To the story. To whatever money, prestige, or reflected light might spill off her success. My father shifted his weight and looked everywhere except at me. For a second, I thought I might have to keep fighting for the microphoneless center of the room myself. Then Cora turned toward them fully. The room was about to hear her. Cora didn't step back behind me, and she didn't move toward them either. She simply faced them, shoulders square, hands loose at her sides, and spoke in the same calm voice she used when explaining a design flaw no one else had noticed. I remember more than you think, she said. My mother opened her mouth, but Cora kept going. Not every word. I was 8, but I remember enough. People nearby stopped pretending not to listen. I saw the reporter freeze with her pen halfway to her notebook. An organizer turned off the smile she had been wearing and looked from Cora to me. I remember the shouting, Cora said. I remember being in the hallway. I remember Grandma saying I was a burden. I remember Aunt Erica saying things would be better without me there. Erica gave a soft laugh that sounded forced even to her own ears. Cora, honey, that's not... Cora cut across her without changing volume. You don't get to stand here and act proud of me now. Then she looked directly at my mother and said the sentence that broke the room open. When I was 8, you wanted my mother to let me go. You said I was a burden. The silence afterward was total. Nobody needed footnotes. Nobody needed context. The truth had arrived whole. My mother reached for denial the way some people reach for a coat when the weather changes. That is not what happened, she said too quickly. Erica let out a brittle little laugh and looked around for agreement that never came. This is such an exaggeration, she said. My father did what he had always done when truth became expensive. He stood there and said nothing. Cora watched all 3 of them with a steadiness that still humbles me when I think about it. Then she said, You stopped being my family the night my mother chose me and you chose convenience. No one interrupted her this time. She turned away from them, reached for my hand, and held on. That small gesture did something years of arguments never could. It ended the conversation without asking permission. Around us, people shifted back from my parents and Erica in that instinctive way crowds do when a performance collapses and leaves the machinery exposed. My mother's face finally lost its practiced softness. Erica looked furious, then embarrassed, then small. My father stared at the floor. No security guard removed them. No host rescued us. They simply found themselves standing in the exact truth they had spent years avoiding, with no audience willing to pretend anymore. For once, the silence belonged to them. In the weeks after the gala, the story moved through the family faster than any update. Relatives who had stayed politely neutral when I left my parents' house years earlier started calling, and once they heard what had actually been said to Cora, some of them stepped back from my parents and Erica without announcing it. A cousin stopped inviting them to host things. An aunt who defended both sides suddenly found clarity. My parents hated losing social ground, but that was never the loss that mattered most to me. The real consequence was simpler. Cora didn't want contact. Not a private apology, not a lunch, not a fresh start with edited facts. "I'm done," she told me one morning while we ate eggs in her own kitchen, sunlight coming across the counter, prototype parts tucked in neat trays by the wall. They don't get to come back now that there's something to brag about. I nodded and passed her the hot sauce. Then they don't. She received the award, kept building the company, and built a life full of work she loved, real peace, and friends who never treated her like a burden. So tell me, did Cora do the right thing by refusing contact, or would you have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more.